In our obsession with antagonisms of the moment, we often forget how much unites all the members of humanity. Perhaps we need some outside universal threat to make us recognize this common bound. I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet, I ask you, is not an alien force already among us?
This is not the end. It is not even the beginning of the end. But it is perhaps the end of the beginning.
With me, I have Reserve Bank Governor Adrian Orr. Adrian, thanks for being here. First of all, how are you and your team bearing up?
We're doing well, thanks. Thanks for asking, and pleased to see you're looking well and healthy. The bank has been running on a skeleton crew actually at our two locations, but fully operational remotely. So we've been very pleased with our ability and in fact our productivity.
Sure. Are you locked down working from home?
Today I am, but I have been going into work, so I've unfortunately got to sign my own letter to say that I was a critical person. And
money being a very essential service.
Yeah, I tried that with my homework when I was young. It never worked.
This crisis is obviously unprecedented. How do you approach that?
Well, I think the catch cry has been confidence and cash flow. And being at the central bank, we can assist on both fronts, particularly with the cash flow. So we've been on the monetary policy side, took the interest rates to a new record low and said we're going to keep them there for at least 1 year. But we then started quantitative easing. In other words, really climbing into the liquidity provision. The way we're doing that is by buying government bonds off the banks so they can swap their holdings of government bonds for our cash. That keeps the long-term interest rates low and it provides liquidity for the banking sector so they can keep on doing their money and lending. So that's
sure. $30 billion, which is a significant amount, and this is the one that I always get asked, where do we get $30 billion from to do that? And I'm always hesitant to say we create it, but we kind of are drawing down on the collective wealth.
Current and all future collective wealth, so really the government itself, whenever it spends, it has to raise its own money. That's through taxes and or borrowing. Government bonds are a form of an IOU that the government writes. People internationally will want to buy that. It's a very low risk, good yielding investment, government bonds globally. And so we are borrowing that money, but it is borrowing. At some point it has to be paid back.
Yeah.
And the case, $30 billion is large in a New Zealand dollar term, but it's very small in terms of global financial markets. So, the debt program, and given the great fiscal position the government is in, there's an enormous amount of headroom for borrowing. Yes, it does have to be paid back through time. But we've done that before, and we're starting from very low levels. At the moment, we're heading back to probably more historically average levels of debt as we get through this.
And you'll keep those assets on the book, so there is hope that that the Reserve Bank can unwind those and sell them back into the market one day.
Completely. I mean, we're very comfortable with it. It's it's business as usual for us, to be honest. So both that, we're part of the Crown balance sheet anyway. It just happens to be sitting with us. That's a good place to be because we bank the banks, and so we're able to work closely with the banking sector, making sure that they can use their assets, they can swap their assets, including these government bonds, for our cash. They keep doing their business, the banks are liquid, they're well capitalised, and the cash flow keeps going.
The banks are key, and obviously no secret there was a bit of tension there last year around the capital review, but it seems like you guys are working together very closely. Just today I see there's an agreement around dividends and also a lending facility there.
Yeah. Oh, without doubt. I mean, the banks are critical infrastructure. They know their role in society. At the end of the day, they're a business. They want to make a profit. We want them to be profitable. But at the same time, I mean, holding capital is for exactly times like this, to be deployed and used. They've got a really tough job They are going to have to be allocating credit carefully across the economy to businesses that are as uncertain as everyone is, and so they will have to make important judgments. But with the banks, we've negotiated very quickly the mortgage holiday. What is it? A rolling loan gathers no loss. So, they're able to provide liquidity to households. And likewise, the government business finance lending scheme is a great initiative. We've opened up a term lending facility so the banks can borrow money from us in order to go off and do their lending. So yet another form of just working together, making sure that they can do their job. They're in every household, every business in the country. They have the reach, we don't.
So that means they can do some lending that might otherwise have been just too risky for them to take on?
I think they will be very challenged. They're going to have to make calls around at what point is this illiquid versus insolvent. And, across not only just the Reserve Bank, but all the regulators as well, we've been working hard to make it easier for banks to make those calls so that, the blame storming at the end of all of this doesn't, continue for too long. We know these are unusual times. We're saying cash flow this place as best you can for the time being as the situation evolves. But we don't run a zero failure regime here in New Zealand. Companies, some will go, some will struggle through with good assistance, others will flourish. Likewise, the financial system.
I mean, we're going to see a huge reshaping of the economy. It seems fairly inevitable now, I guess, in the next months and years potentially.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, you'll see aggregation in some sectors. You'll see new businesses coming to the fore. You'll see ownership changes happening across businesses. It's going to be a very dynamic period. And I know we all come out, we were very smart people, very innovative going into this. We'll be the same coming out. But, keeping that cash flow and that confidence going is a critical role we can play at the Reserve Bank.
Yeah. In terms of retaining that confidence and that optimism, I guess, in very tough times about New Zealand's position in the world, how are you approaching that? Because, it is easy to get overwhelmed by this. A lot of people are.
Yeah, and watch out for each other as well. I mean, without doubt, I myself, you have moments of, oh, really?
Yeah.
But then, keeping yourself busy. I feel very fortunate being able to be fully engaged doing what we're doing. So motivation is certainly not lacking. But the confidence is strong. People just have to know that they're sitting here with the best banking system in the world, one of the most best capitalised, highly liquid, and you've got a government fiscal position. I've always said we're starting from a great place into a tough situation.
It's very difficult to predict things right now, but what next? I mean, what other tools does the bank have that it can use if required?
Yeah, so on the monetary policy side, we can continue providing stimulus for a long time. Interest rates are going to remain low for a long time, and we've got various means we can increase if we needed to, the quantitative easing. Likewise, we can use other tools, for example, the interest rate again, and or directly purchasing foreign assets through the exchange rate. Through the financial stability side, there's accelerated work going on with the government around deposit protection. That was being discussed publicly prior to this crisis, and so that work's being accelerated, so giving people some comfort around that. And then ongoing, I suppose, access to liquidity. We can continue to accept riskier assets onto our book to provide that cash to keep the businesses going. The challenge will be really getting out into the households and into the businesses. Some businesses are much easier to access through, being large, having many avenues of raising capital. It's the small businesses, it's the households who, have to have a close relationship with their banks so they can be back on their feet very quickly.
So you'll continue to work with the Finance Minister and government about making sure these things are lined up to get to the right people, I guess?
That's right. I mean, what's the famous quote? I think we're at the end of the beginning. We're certainly not at the beginning of the end. We're still talking about near-term triage, making sure that the plumbing's working. I know government is already moving in. When I talk about government, the whole bureaucratic situation, moving into how do you dismount from this lockdown? What are the signals? Do you do it town by town, island by island? What level of confidence do you need? What is critical infrastructure that just has to survive and will be financed? So all of that work's going on, as well as much longer term work around how can New Zealand really benefit coming out of this situation in a global position? And being small, being isolated, we stand a great chance of being highly successful.
I guess like a lot of us, a lot of the world, we are, of course, just watching and waiting and hoping that, the lockdown works, get on top of this first wave, because that's the unknowable right now is the disease, the virus itself.
That's exactly it. I mean, the businesses are never going to feel confident until we have answers to that. There are still more questions than answers around transmission, around whether people do or don't have natural immunity to it, or whether that's just, type 1, type 2 errors. All of these things are being worked on rapidly globally, and I know here there's some significant quantitative work going on. What we can do from our side is at least provide as much certainty, normality as possible through the standard financing banking structure. But it's the health issue that is number one, and I would just not like to be in the position of saying at what point do you start dismounting. It comes down to that simple: what is the cost of a life?
So today we have a total of 82 new cases of COVID-19. 50 of those are confirmed cases, and 52 are confirmed and 30 are probable. So 52 confirmed cases and 30 probable. There are no additional deaths to report, and we can now confirm that 127 reported cases have recovered from COVID-19. So the total of confirmed and combined cases now in New Zealand is 950, and as I said earlier, that's 82 more than yesterday. Overnight, we have fewer people in hospital with COVID-19, and today there are 10 in hospitals around the country, including one person in the ICU at Wellington Regional Hospital. All patients are in a stable condition. From our laboratory testing numbers, we can report the 7-day rolling average has increased to 2,264 per day. Yesterday, we did the highest number of single tests in a day. That was 3,631. So our total of COVID-19 tests completed to date is 33,116. And we now have capacity to do, should we need to, over 6,000 tests per day around the country. We are continuing to grow our supply and stocks of key components used in the lab process, and that includes swabs. So altogether we have more than 100,000 nasal and throat swabs in stock, and enough componentry for the full process for lab testing for 37,000 tests in the country, and supplies coming all the time from overseas and from inside New Zealand to continue our testing capacity. There is a high demand for nasal swabs, and our local manufacturer is ramping up production with 300,000 swabs due over the next 3 to 4 weeks. For the cases we have information on, there remains a strong link to overseas travel. That is now at 47%, as well as links to confirmed cases in New Zealand, 34%. We still have a small number, around 1% of cases that we have concluded are a result of community transmission, but we have around 17% still being investigated, and as I've said earlier, in the last couple of days, they may well transpire to be community transmission. We have 10 significant clusters, and there will be an update on our website around the clusters, but just the numbers for the 3 that are the largest are in Auckland, around the Marist School. The total number there is 60 cases. The second biggest is the one associated with a wedding in Bluff, and that has 55 cases. And the third is the one in Matamata, which has a total of 54 cases now confirmed. I'd like to just talk about the issuing of a Section 71F notice under the Health Act 1956, which I issued yesterday, and there's a copy of that notice on the covid19.govt.nz website. Now, essentially, the purpose of issuing this notice is to provide greater clarity for everybody about what the expectations are around self-isolation as we are in Alert Level 4. Now, what we've seen over the last week is a very, very high level of understanding and compliance with those expectations. There have been a few areas where there have been questions over the week, and the purpose of the notice is to provide clarification for people about what is expected under an Alert Level 4 lockdown situation. So the notice covers in some detail what those expectations are, and it includes really a good description of what an acceptable bubble type arrangement is as well. We also know over this first week that or so of the lockdown that there have been some people who haven't been, it's a small minority, but they haven't been following the guidance and the expectations, and so the notice sets out the rules for what's expected of everybody and therefore clarifies the situations in which police powers may be exercised to ensure that we get that high level of compliance. And again, this is a public health notice. It underscores the fact that what we are all responding to is a major threat to public health in New Zealand, and it clarifies what the expectations are on every New Zealander to ensure that we can collectively address that threat, and where necessary that the police have really clear basis on which to act to enforce that. I'm going to hand over to Dr. McElnay now to make a few comments.
Thanks, Ashley. So I want to update you on our technical advisory group, which met yesterday. And one of the things that they discussed was the case definition. So the technical advisory group updated the definition of a case of COVID-19 to separate the respiratory symptoms from any travel history or known contact with a confirmed or probable case. Testing will now be available for people with respiratory problems suggestive of COVID-19, regardless of their travel history or contact with a confirmed or probable case, and fever is no longer a requirement. The technical advisory group also rediscussed recovery, and there has been no change to our recovery definition. An individual with COVID-19 can be released from isolation when at least 10 days have passed since the onset of symptoms and at least 48 hours of being symptom-free. A negative test is not required for an individual in isolation at home, although in some circumstances a test may be done at the discretion of the clinician where the patient has been in hospital. I want to just talk about face masks. We are watching very closely the advice that we expect to get in the next few days from WHO and CDC around whether or not people should wear face masks when out and about to limit the spread of virus from people who are infected but not showing symptoms. The best advice at the moment is that basic hygiene measures such as frequent hand washing, physical distancing, and sneeze and cough etiquette remain the mainstay of our defence against COVID-19. There are ways in which wearing a mask can be helpful, but there are also ways in which it could be harmful. We know that in some countries, it's common practice when people who are unwell to wear a mask when they go out. That's a good practice that protects other people. But there is also some evidence that wearing a mask can also do harm, such as when it leads to people touching their face more often because of the discomfort with wearing a mask. And that can actually increase the risk of contamination to your hand, and it can also give you a false sense of security. But we acknowledge that these kinds of conversations are important, and we do already have some resources about face masks on our website. And lastly, on Healthline, a reminder that Healthline continues to be available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The work the team has done to increase capacity of the services means that wait times are much less. They're on average about 5 minutes. Healthline handled 14,746 calls yesterday and continues to be a popular service for people concerned about their health. Related to this, we are, however, also seeing a trend in both primary care and Healthline of people with other health issues leaving it long to see their doctor or call Healthline because they're concerned that the focus should be on COVID-19. I want to reiterate that we have the capacity to provide appropriate care, so people with health issues should act sooner rather than later. Please continue to contact your GP and continue to ring Healthline.
They've fast become part of the new way we're living. Queues and big waits just to get the basics.
And it was quite sad watching a lot of old people stand in the queue, and it was so hot.
This supermarket west of Auckland was one facing the sudden big lines and endless customers.
But now the queues are gone, and it's because technology's come along to make life just a little bit easier. You can sit in the comfort of your car until you're called in by text message.
For now, the service only available at this supermarket and one Pack and Save back in the city.
It made sense to me straight away, so it was just a no-brainer.
Shoppers show that text as they walk in, and look at this, a near empty line, but a wait of 45 minutes. And people waiting in their vehicles.
You know, you've got to imagine that is a queue, it's a virtual queue, and it's a good indication when you see how many cars are in the car park.
But it's not just about keeping comfy or taking a break.
You can sit in the comfort of your car, listen to the radio, check your Facebook.
It's also very good for keeping people apart.
You're always worried about standing next to people now.
Shoppers in this trial giving it a big thumbs up.
Really easy. So yeah, just sat in my car and then I got a text saying that I had 5 minutes to come into the supermarket.
I was a bit naughty and I snuck off to another shop, and then I got a text saying you can come, you got 5 minutes to come.
Time freed up and much less stress.
And Kim is with us now. Kim, cold weather is on the way. When can we expect to see this at other supermarkets?
Well, here's one of those long queues just behind me now. One of those things that New World and Pack and Save supermarkets are looking to see what they can do there. This is just a trial, and it is just at those two supermarkets in Kumu and in Royal Oak Pack and Save, also in Auckland. And because it's just a trial, those need to get underway. Food Service will then look at that to see how it went and to see if it can be rolled out across the country. We also talked to Countdown Supermarkets today to see if it was looking at doing anything similar. Not at this stage, but it is saying that it is trying to convince people to not go to the supermarket as often as they normally would. And a figure from Countdown today, 100,000 people have registered for online shopping in just the last week.
All right, thanks Kim. Kim Baker-Wilson.
Our cover story tonight is about a doctor in Wuhan. You've probably not heard of her because her story has been hidden by the mighty dragon. Hidden until it got out. We are talking about Dr. Ai Fen. She's the director of the emergency department at the Wuhan Central Hospital. She's also the reason why the world found out about China's cover-up. She was perhaps the first doctor to order tests on the early coronavirus patients. And now she has gone missing. The latest reports claim that her whereabouts are unknown now. Why is this doctor so important? Why must her story be told? Because Dr. Ai Fen has ruffled the feathers of the Communist Party of China. Not only did she find the virus, she even spoke about it in China. Last month, she gave an interview to a Chinese magazine. The government did not like it. The interview created fresh trouble for Beijing. It also became proof of China's cover-up because Dr. Ai Fen had revealed it all. She told the world how China knew about the coronavirus way back in December and how China did nothing to stop it. Dr. Ai Fen said all of this in her interview. She said that she was not the whistleblower. She was the one who gave the whistle. Tonight on Gravitas, we have for you the Ai Fen revelations. We've been investigating her claims. We've also reported on some of her assessments in the past. And now we have accessed a copy of Dr. Ai Fen's interview. This was removed from the internet by the Chinese censors. The interview is the smoking gun, the proof of China's cover-up. This is what it says. Dr. Ai Fen was in her hospital when the patients walked in. It was a disease that no other doctor had seen before. The patients were showing flu-like symptoms, but usual treatment methods were not working on them. So Dr. Ai Fen, she was treating some of the patients herself, and she decided to carry out some tests. The result, she said, was shocking. The report called it a SARS coronavirus. Now, the interview says that Dr. Ifen read the report several times to confirm it. Her conclusion did not change. She said that she broke out in a cold sweat. She knew an unprecedented challenge was staring at her. Dr. Ifen circled the diagnosis. She took a photograph of the report and she shared it with a friend. Soon the report was circulated across Wuhan's medical circles. Other doctors began talking about this new virus, this mysterious disease. One of them was Dr. Li Wenliang, the man on your screen. He too received this report. And he's now known as the first whistleblower. Dr. Ifen gave him the whistle, as she puts it. He shared her report further. Soon it emerged on the radar of the Chinese censors. They found out what was being circulated, and this is where the cover-up begins. Dr. Li was pulled up by Chinese officials for sharing the report. He was accused of spreading rumors. And then the Chinese police tracked down Dr. Ifen as the source. They told her to stay quiet. First, she received a warning. Her hospital told her to not spread this information. 2 days later, she was called before her hospital's disciplinary inspection committee. She was accused of spreading rumors. She was reprimanded. Disciplinary action for raising concerns. Dr. Ifen tried to warn her seniors. She tried to raise an alarm about the Wuhan virus, but her voice was muzzled. The interview says that she knew about human-to-human transmission, but no one listened to her. Instead of acting on her report, the Wuhan Central Hospital joined the government's cover-up. The staff was forbidden from passing messages or images about this virus. A few months later, Dr. Ifen got a chance to speak again. Her interview was published in a Chinese magazine called People, and this time, she did not hold anything back. She told everything that she knew, and now nobody knows where she is. Gone missing for reporting on the Wuhan virus.
It's usually invisible, but from today, a thin blue line marks the border between Queensland and New South Wales. Anyone without a Queensland number plate, permit or proof of exemption is turned away. But with the increased restrictions overnight came increased confusion.
So I think it's probably necessary, but we've just come from a shopping complex and to be honest, it's just full of old people.
For some families split by the border, the tougher restrictions could have had big implications. But late last night, the government granted a shared custody exemption.
The big issue, of course, was that if there was a lockdown, that the children could get stranded over the other side of the border.
With large numbers of Covid-19 cases on the Gold Coast, politicians are divided about whether or not New South Wales should close its border.
We're still seeing so many day trippers and holiday makers coming over the border here into northern New South Wales. So I'm calling on the New South Wales Premier, shut the New South Wales border.
A better use of resources is not to close the border. Just because you've got police sitting on a motorbike at the border, where they're really able to be used is out there on the street.
While New South Wales hasn't closed its border yet, there are fines in place for anyone who leaves the home without a valid reason, like medical assistance, food or exercise. This has created some tension among surfers as Queensland number plates crowd northern New South Wales beaches.
If they're coming to the beach to exercise, that's still within the realms of what is within the guidelines.
Borderline confusion in an already confusing climate. Leah White, ABC News, Tweed Heads.
And the question is, should Americans be wearing non-surgical masks in public? So are officials any closer to issuing a clear advice on that?
Well, that's a really, really interesting question because we know that the White House is debating this. We know that the top infectious diseases authorities have been pushing for this, effectively urging people to, when they do leave their homes, when they do leave these lockdowns to go and get medicine or groceries, that they wear some sort of face covering, some sort of homemade mask or a cloth mask. They don't want people wearing surgical masks, but they do think that perhaps these more homemade kind of style cotton masks will stop the spread of coronavirus somewhat. Now, that view is, of course, a little bit contentious. Some people don't think that masks work. Some people think that they give people who are wearing them a false sense of security. But just a short time ago, I was chatting to an Australian who's played a really prominent role in pushing this issue to the forefront in the United States. He's a medical data scientist, Jeremy Howard, and he is firmly of the view that if everyone who went outside was to wear some sort of face covering, then the rate of the spread of the coronavirus would be dramatically reduced. And he said that applies to countries right across the world. Here's a little of our conversation.
You've got to. You've absolutely got to. I mean, particularly in Australia, right? Because Australia is coming into winter. So the Southern Hemisphere is going to be in so much trouble here because the Southern Hemisphere are going to be the first to actually see what this thing can do.
Concern is also growing for doctors and nurses working tirelessly to help COVID-19 patients and contracting the virus themselves at an alarming rate. 140 employees at one hospital alone, the Brigham and Women's in Boston, testing positive. Matt Gutman has much more on that story this morning. Good morning, Matt.
Hey, good morning, Michael. Given their daily exposure, I suppose it's not surprising that healthcare workers are getting sick. But here's what's disturbing. Experts are now telling us that the viruses are like poison, and the higher the dose, the more fatal it can be. And so higher doses combined with poor protective gear are making for a dangerous combination.
Frontline health workers themselves are turning into patients at alarming rates, and it's being called an epidemic within an epidemic. 20% of COVID-positive patients in Ohio and Minnesota are healthcare workers. In Boston, over 700 healthcare workers testing positive. They are exposed to the virus more than anyone else.
Every day when I go to work, I feel like a sheep going to slaughter. My colleagues and I are writing our last will and testament.
Experts say it's not just the frequency of exposure, but also that healthcare workers are exposed to larger doses of the virus as well.
When you get exposed to a virus, your immune system immediately starts mounting a response. At the same time, the virus starts spreading within the body. An outcome depends on which wins the race, viral spread or the immune response. When you start with a high dose of virus, it gives it a head start in the race.
Meaning the virus can overload the immune system of even the healthy. People like Frank Garbin.
And by then, his breathing was almost non-existent. And when paramedics arrived, they tried to revive him for about 45 minutes.
Garbin wasn't just any COVID patient. The 60-year-old was an ER doctor, the first in the nation to die from COVID. His best friend, Deborah Lyons, on the phone when he passed.
And he also knew exactly when he got it. He knew it was those 4 shifts that he had to use the same mask. He knew it.
What do we want? PPE!
Shortages in protective gear triggering protests in California and Kansas City. Nate is a nurse in New Orleans.
What are the biggest shortages you're seeing on the day-to-day?
I think we're short gowns, obviously, the disposable isolation gowns, the N95 mask. We're using masks for 5 to 7 shifts generally.
Reusing the same masks over and over. Masks are stored in those brown paper bags on those racks. But even when they do have proper protective gear, medical professionals can fall ill.
I did everything right, and I still came up positive, so I'm not really sure what's going on there.
Yet still doctors and nurses are turning up every day. And despite all of that danger, volunteers are now turning out in droves. In California, New York, Colorado, over 120,000 retirees or people in other areas of medicine have volunteered despite all of that danger to join the fight against COVID-19. Michael.
Yeah, all heroes on the...
Well, first up on the show, and Britain has reported its highest death toll with a record 569 deaths in one single day. It also reported the second highest increase in the number of positive coronavirus cases, with a surge of 4,424 cases, taking the total number of infected cases to over 33,700. With mounting pressure on the government to contain the virus, the officials have promised to carry out more tests and ensure protection for frontline medical staff as well. The Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, promised action. Hancock, who himself was in isolation, returned from a quarantine after recovery and said that the rate of infection had been doubling every 3 days. He also said that the government had set a goal for testing 100,000 people per day till the end of the month.
The new national effort for testing will ensure that we can get tests for everyone who needs them. And I'm delighted that the pharmaceutical industry is rising to this challenge and putting unprecedented resources into testing. Taken together, I am now setting the goal of 100,000 tests per day by the end of this month.
Britain has tested 153,000 people so far, and the vast majority of those tested are patients in hospitals. There's also growing concerns about lack of protective gear and medical equipment for the medical staff treating patients. However, despite being susceptible to the deadly virus, the state-run National Health Service has been at the forefront of fighting the pandemic. Londoners came out on their balconies and applauded health workers for their work. And the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who is currently in self-isolation, also joined a national round of applause for doctors, nurses and essential staff as well. Now, growing cases of coronavirus are going undetected and untreated in Britain due to the lack of medical facilities. In order to fight this hurdle, the British Army has also been roped in. The Army is now setting up a temporary hospital with 500 beds for COVID-19 patients at a sports centre in northwest England.
Due to take 3 days. However, as always, we will remain flexible to support the NHS where possible. So if any of the tasks do come up, we will remain on standby to support that as best we can.
The lethal coronavirus has infected more than 33,700 people and has killed over 2,900 in Britain. As of now, close to 163 patients are under critical care and 135 have recovered completely. And well, WION's London Bureau Chief Mandy Clark is now joining us live from London for the latest on the ground situation. And well, Mandy, a 24% spike in cases in the last 24 days or hours, I beg your pardon, and it seems to be that UK is in a critical condition at this moment.
Absolutely. The peak of what they were expecting, these numbers of cases to be doubling every day. Matt Hancock yesterday stated that it is happening sooner than they expected. Of course, these are the infection rates before the lockdown. The lockdown is less than 2 weeks old. And so hopefully by the end of this week, this is where the government has said they are hoping to start seeing a leveling off. If they don't start seeing a leveling off at the end of this week, that means the lockdown hasn't been stringent enough and there may be new measures. But a lot of these cases were essentially infections before those measures have come into place. Now, the big question that the government has been facing was that should they have not locked down much, much sooner the minute the coronavirus was detected in the UK. And so that is where they're facing a lot of criticism. Of course, Matt Hancock himself got the coronavirus because they weren't adhering to their own rules when it comes to social distancing. So he was a far more cowed health secretary in that press conference, acknowledging that perhaps they should have moved sooner, but now the main focus is getting those essential vital PPE equipment and especially those tests, antibody tests, those blood tests to those frontline healthcare workers. So that is the state where Britain's in, and they're just really waiting to see if these lockdown measures will have an effect and flatten that curve.
Right, the lockdown measures, of course, Mandy, coming a bit late, but how does the UK government plan to get these testing kits and test more people and also get more equipment and gear for its medical staff, given that seems to be the critical problem for all countries at this point?
Yeah, and the NHS procurement system really came into really kind of got examined yesterday. The fact that they didn't really they had a select of suppliers, and it was very red tape. They needed to get rid of this as a moment of national crisis, pull in all those private sector companies that can come and help make ventilators, create those PPE equipment. So it was really putting a spotlight on the level of red tape that's still inexistent and really shouldn't be. This should be all hands on deck. So that is now their new measures. They're removing a lot of the paperwork, essentially, that slowed down it. hopefully that will make a difference so they can move supplies to the chain and get it to the front line where they need it the most.
Right, absolutely, Mandy. Thanks very much indeed for that. And this, of course, coming at a time when the UK's death toll has now surpassed that of China. Thanks for that.
The World Bank has approved its first set of emergency fund allocations and support operations for developing countries facing the pandemic, and India will be receiving $1 billion, the highest amount of these funds allocated by the World Bank. These funds will be dispersed in a fast-track mode, single-window facility to carry out the process dedicated only for COVID-19 response. The first set of fund allocation will amount to $1.9 billion and will aid 25 countries. The World Bank wants to extend its COVID-19 support operations to more than 40 countries in the coming days. The organization is also mulling on redeploying resources worth $1.7 billion and is ready to release close to $160 billion in the next 15 months to fight the impact of the pandemic and fix the global economy that is being crippled by it. In India, the novel coronavirus has infected more than 2,500 people and has killed over 70. The country is in its 11th day of lockdown and it still continues to be under a massive threat. Having been allocated the highest emergency fund from the World Bank, India will also use these resources for laboratory diagnostics and procurement of medical and protective gear to end the crisis. The World Bank is also funding Afghanistan with $100 million to slow the spread of the virus, and in Pakistan, where the pandemic has resulted in the death of 34 people, aid worth $200 million will be used in preparedness and emergency response. Yemen in the Middle East will receive aid worth $26.9 million, and Africa's Ethiopia, Congo and Djibouti will receive a total funding of $134 million. But the lethal coronavirus has already made an entry in the war-ridden Middle East region, worsening economic situation in the region, displacing refugee populations, and the failed states of Libya, Yemen and Syria have very limited resources and medical facilities are now facing a higher threat. In countries like Mongolia and Cambodia, where the World Bank has allocated $26.9 million and $20 million respectively, COVID-19 is yet to take the lives of its victims. But the virus continues to be a huge threat due to poor medical infrastructure. The only positive factor working for these countries is that the small population is limiting the spread of the virus. Prognosis for COVID-19 in Central Asia is grim. Poor healthcare facilities, crumbling infrastructure and low ranking in several global indices has put these countries in a grave situation. In Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, nurses are wearing raincoats to protect themselves from the infection. The World Bank has allocated $12.15 million to Kyrgyzstan, where 435 cases have been reported, and $11.3 million to Tajikistan, which is yet to report a single case of COVID-19. The World Bank's first set of operations for COVID-19 crisis is set to ensure the broadening of economic programs and recover from the crisis as quickly as possible. It also aims to create an atmosphere of growth and development for small and medium businesses and the poor, who are the most vulnerable during this crisis.
Never let a crisis go to waste. Especially a government-manufactured crisis. The elites needed a pandemic lie to shut the countries down, now they have it. With over 3 billion people throughout the world in lockdown, countless businesses forced to close and going bankrupt, and social distancing from the COVID-19 invisible enemy the new norm, indeed. This is unprecedented in the world's history. The politicians are doing the same exact thing as they do when they get us into war. The governments are closing down entire economies. They and the media have declared fighting the virus a war. And, just as they take us to war after war with no exit strategy, so too, their lockdown war strategy has started the Greatest Depression with no exit strategy that can stop the global economy from crashing. We are going to see crime levels going off the charts, as the little people cannot pay the rent and bills. These politicians are all telling us what to do because they do not have to worry about getting paid. They steal our money in the name of taxes. You cannot put millions out of work and not expect this thing to explode in a way we have never seen before in history. This thing was going down before. They only propped up the equity market with trillions of dollars created out of thin air. The world is being led into the age of biological terror with controlled demolition of the economy that is already causing unprecedented carnage across markets and around the globe. Instead of fixing the broken healthcare system, they would rather kill off the people who need it the most. This is Agenda 21 unfolding in front of our eyes. The Fed will be the government to the government. We are being played and robbed. Agenda 21 or Agenda 2030 is the United Nations depopulation plan to kill us. The global cabal of UN Agenda 21 is behind global warming, regionalism, zoning, land and water use control, wealth redistribution, weakening, and eventual replacement of the dollar as the world's reserve currency. And now in 2020 we are witnessing martial law in countries around the world due to a manufactured disease. Mass mandatory vaccines will be here soon. People will be begging for a vaccine. This is a war against the people. This is unfolding before our eyes. It has all been manipulated to change life dramatically as we know it. The dots are connecting now at faster than ever, and the picture looks ugly. Agenda 21 will reduce the human population from almost 8 billion to around 750 million. This means that the UN is planning on killing just over 90% of the global population. COVID-19 is just one step closer to this agenda. And it seems to be a huge step forward. The Green New Deal is Agenda 21 too. Oh, it just encapsulates everything these elite want in one document. Today Americans would be outraged if UN troops entered Los Angeles to restore order. Tomorrow they will be grateful. This is especially true if they were told there was an outside threat from beyond, whether real or promulgated, that threatened our very existence. It is then that all peoples of the world will plead with world leaders to deliver them from this evil. The one thing every man fears is the unknown. When presented with this scenario, individual rights will be willingly relinquished for the guarantee of their well-being granted to them by their world government. Said Henry Kissinger, a long time ago. Deception is a state of mind in the mind of the state. Behind the ostensible government sits enthroned an invisible government owing no allegiance and acknowledging no responsibility to the people. The individual is handicapped by coming face to face with a conspiracy so monstrous he cannot believe it exists. 98% are still sleeping, and the ones who are aware feel powerless. But why? Our fate isn't sealed. I strongly believe that once awareness has hit a critical mass, it will spread exponentially like a virus. Mass media obviously didn't say a word about this. A few years ago, the people of Iceland overthrew their government and banking system. The global economy was already set to crash. They wanted to shift blame and reward the criminals with trillions of our money, amongst other agendas like killing us off. And things are about to get just a little crazier. This is the greatest depression ever. The biggest economic crash of our lifetime. This system is collapsing around us. There is no fixing it. No chance this could be fixed. It'll fall to the point of total officials' desperation. The bottom is when they admit they've lost and have nothing to do. The last time around, the banksters and other CEOs were in trouble because they were gambling with other people's money on Wall Street. They were losing very badly. The US government bailed most of them out, but they didn't learn a damn thing and spent the bailout funds on bonuses for themselves and kept on gambling. That is partly why we are now headed for the greatest depression ever. America is also in debt up to its eyebrows, which certainly doesn't help. The end result is central bankers created the biggest, most egregious bubble in financial history. A $250 trillion debt bomb with another $500 plus trillion in derivatives trading based on its yields. To put this into perspective, the tech bubble was about $15 trillion in size. The housing bubble, which triggered the 2008 crisis, was about $30 trillion in size. The bond bubble is over $250 trillion in size. Some $50 trillion of this is in sovereign debt, with the rest coming from corporate debt, mortgages, auto loans, credit cards, and the like. The $2.5 trillion stimulus money is only going to go to the gangsters, the bankers, just like last time. The bankers are laughing because they already stole tens of trillions post-2008 with all the politicians on top of the trillions they stole pre-2008. Tens of trillions hidden in offshore Cayman accounts. The money spent on keeping this propped while trillions are funneled to insiders so they can buy assets for pennies on the dollar dwarfs what you will see in any stimulus. Interestingly, no politicians are objecting to the Wall Street $10 trillion bailout, but stamping their feet over every other element. And as we continue to shovel trillions at this turgid mass of puss-filled fraud, we are at once tossing away our chance at vitality on the way back up, if there's going to be a way back up at all. Give a man a gun, he will rob the bank. Give a man a bank, he will rob the world. The government rushed to create financial panic with the virus catalyst. It will cause numerous unintended consequences, which will feed more fuel to the fire. As the Fed falters in its attempt to save the economy, it will be swallowed by the Treasury and become history while a new monetary system is born. The virus will then have accomplished one of its intended purposes. This is called Operation Control. They want to see how much of the population cowers in fear and believes the government. Meanwhile, the Americans are told to shut up, sit at home, quit your job, and close down all the gun doors while they're letting all the prisoners out. Who's most likely to get sick and die? The people outside in the fresh air and sunlight getting exercise, or the people cooped up at home breathing recycled air and sitting on the couch watching endless mind-bending TV? This thing is here to stay. No 2-week sporadic quarantines are going to stop it. Plus, the slower it spreads, the more it mutates before eventually infecting you with an even stronger version of itself. By that time, you'll be so out of shape from not going outside, a cold would probably kill you. Get healthy, people. It's a war for the bankster world order, and they are using citizens as hostages with house imprisonment under false pretenses. Covid-19 is the man-made designer planademic which will usher in the brave new world. It is the dark vessel that has already transferred trillions of dollars from the people to the corrupt banks and corporations. I don't buy the narrative that this is all about fighting a virus, and therefore we need to give up our freedoms of movement and assembly. Yes, there are some legitimate concerns, mostly exaggerated, prompting draconian measures. I also believe the threat of the virus is being used as a power grab. A permanent, ever-expanding power grab over the American people. Just as the fear of climate change is an excuse by elites in and out of government to try and control us. The people behind this virus threat aren't going to willingly give you your freedoms back. The Fed to start buying stocks through ETFs. The capitalism has been dead for a while, but the Fed is now going to make sure it is dead by pumping lead into a corpse. Former Fed slackers Yellen and Bernanke are calling for the Fed to buy stocks and bonds, which is illegal. The Fed is monetizing everything else, including corporate junk bonds. The Fed has no more bullets, but hey, we knew that as the government has been buying up all the ammo. The US sociopaths in charge are using one credit card to pay down another, with all the progeny of their tax slaves holding the liability. The national debt clock shows tax revenues retreating across all levels. Government with 1/3 of the population now in financial survival mode, this will accelerate the longer at-home quarantining continues. The only thing keeping the Ponzi alive at this point is more Ponzi. Good luck, peeps. Time to end the Fed and seize their assets and gold and let them keep the debt. Start exchanging US Treasury notes for the Federal Reserve notes. This crash was coming no matter what. The stock market was ridiculously overvalued. By definition, debt is unserviceable. The money you need to cover the interests needs to be taken from the other loan. There is a solution here, and it involves people in the streets revolting at the notion of the Fed inflating its balance sheet to buy stocks. Short of that, nothing will change, and the party will go on. It is up to the people to end this supercycle of debt. The majority of government budgets come from taxing businesses. Businesses that are currently shut down. It is kind of hard to tax sales when there are no sales. The absolute decimation of business because of being locked down is far worse than losing 2 employees to cold for 2 weeks. Not only will the virus be good for taking away more of our civil liberties, but it's also a great excuse for austerity measures. Everyone will be bailed out with printed currency. Everyone will be paid. The problem, your check will buy a bag of peanuts. The only reason why the dollar doesn't become like the currency in Zimbabwe is that the US has the world staring down the barrel of its gun. Without that fiat threat, there are probably as many grains of sand in the ocean as there are dollar bills in circulation. The least bad option is debt repudiation and a deflationary depression. That would be the honorable approach. Since our leaders do not have any honor, they'll go with the total destruction of the currency and a hyperinflationary depression. Either way, a lot of people are going to see their standard of living destroyed. Now perhaps you people who are gullible enough to invest in a paper stock market with no tangible backing will understand the risks you take. Besides, the stock market was really living in a different world from the rest of the economy. The economy never really recovered since 2008, and it'd been sluggish at best, with 93,000 businesses shutting down in 2019 alone. There were signs all along the economy was in the tank, and it took the virus to expose just how fragile it really was. Communist Chinese told us time and time again they had a 100-year plan and were going to knock our block off. Yet even now, with everything basically shut down, the economy outside of food and medical grinding to a halt, people are sitting there hoping that their fake pre-virus lifestyle of complete BS can come back like with a flick of a switch. See how easy it was to use fear to control and manipulate the malleable mushed minds of the masses. Who would have ever believed that a hyped-up fabricated story, in conjunction with your average flu epidemic, could have pulled off this global scam? This virus is a cover for the collapse of the US dollar. When we wake up from this, there will be Costco, Walmart, and a handful of other businesses open. All the owned private companies will be bankrupted. We will have to get our stuff from Amazon delivered. You will be unemployed and have a limited amount of time before you have to report to your free condo, where they will provide food and a task. All your private property will be taken from you, and you will be given a uniform to wear. Everything will be guaranteed for you: vaccines, food, and shelter. You will start feeling ill soon after. Don't worry, you will have free health care to make you feel better until you die. Something had to be done. Soon. Something in which multiple stakeholders among ruling elites would benefit. That something is a financial reset. Offload toxic assets and stocks to Uncle Sam. Forgive debt in return for inflated asset prices. Borrow from Uncle Sam, speculate, keep the profits, and ask Uncle Sam to pay for the losses. The problem, of course, was contriving a sufficiently scary global crisis to pull off such a scam. Not much will be left to reopen at the end of April. Most restaurants, especially the mom and pops, are never going to reopen. 1/3 road of this country will be unemployed. Savings will be wiped out. And people will be behind in rent and mortgages. It is time for the American patriots to rise up and march on Washington and take this country back. Anyone who doesn't think this coronavirus was here by December or even November is dumb. We are connected to China with non-stop flights and huge amounts of Chinese Americans going back and forth all the time. This was here all winter but was just thought to be the flu. Yes, it's not pleasant to get sick and die, and we should do everything to help people at risk, but putting trillions of dollars on our kids' backs and shutting down everything is very stupid. Huge differences between now and 1929. For one, most of the home mortgages on residential real estate were 7-year term. A high percentage of these homes were paid off by the time the Depression hit. Aside from farmers, ordinary people did not have any debt. People genuinely cared for one another and would often reach out to complete strangers in order to offer help. Compared to today, crime was virtually non-existent. Violent crime was so rare that when it did occur, it made headlines. Drug use was confined to a very small percentage of the population. Being a drug addict was considered to be the lowest of lows. The family unit was traditional and strong. Mothers did not work outside the home, and divorce was rare. Children feared their father and respected their mother. Schools still taught moral values and honored the history of our nation, including our founding fathers. Etc., etc., etc. Does everyone know why this crash isn't as painful as 1929? The answer: the welfare system. There was no welfare cushion to be exploited in 1929 by the freebies army who makes up over 40% of the population today in the US. Crash the welfare system and just see what happens. This is where the Second Amendment becomes very important. In 1929, a lot of people still had skills and knew how to be thrifty. Today, that's not the case. And supply chains are crazy long in comparison. We are the polar opposite of virtually every point listed above, and more. This is just a quick list that came to mind. With that being said, how do you think society will hold up when things really get out of control?
For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places.
Over the span of 2,000 years, we have been given a collection of 66 books written by 40 people in various cultures, time periods, and languages. Today we call this collection the Holy Bible. Upon investigation, we find that these 66 books combine to form a message to humanity from a being outside of space and time by writing history before it happens. The Bible predicted the advent of the New Age movement and the New World Order thousands of years ago. It also tells us of a man who will rule this world empire and what his true intentions will be. All of this has been in the works for thousands of years, and it all hinges on Satan's ability to deceive mankind. The Apostle Paul in the 1st century AD wrote several letters to early churches, which are now called the epistles. The far application of these letters are a clear warning for us today. It is a warning of impending deception that will influence the whole world. Paul warns us of this deception in Ephesians 5, where he states, "Let no one deceive you with empty words." Then in his first letter to the Corinthians, he again tells us, "Do not deceive yourselves. If any one of you thinks he is wise by the standards of this age, he should become a fool so that he may become wise." In a letter to the Romans, he describes those who willingly live in lies when he writes, "Their throats are open graves, their tongues practice deceit, the poison of vipers is on their lips. For such people are not serving our Lord Christ, but their own appetites. By smooth talk and flattery, they deceive the minds of naive people." In a letter to Timothy, Paul clearly describes the world we see today when he writes, "The Spirit clearly says that in later times some will abandon the faith and follow deceiving spirits in things taught by demons." In the second letter to the Thessalonians, Paul describes the New World Order and the Antichrist when he wrote, "Don't let anyone deceive you in any way, for that day will not come until the rebellion occurs and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the man doomed to destruction. Don't you remember that when I was with you, I used to tell you these things, and now you know what is holding him back, so that he may be revealed at the proper time. For the secret power of lawlessness is already at work, but the one who now holds it back will continue to do so till he is taken out of the way. And then the lawless one will be revealed, whom the Lord Jesus will overthrow with the breath of his mouth and destroy by the splendor of his coming. The coming of the lawless one will be in accordance with the work of Satan, displayed in all kinds of counterfeit miracles, signs, and wonders, and in every sort of evil that deceives those who are perishing. They are perishing because they refused to love the truth and so be saved. For this reason, God sends them a powerful delusion so that they will believe the lie, and so that all will be condemned who have not believed the truth, but have delighted in wickedness." The Apostle John, while in prison on the island of Patmos, had a vision of the end times and the deceiving entities that will walk the earth, stating, "And the great dragon was cast out, the ancient serpent who is called Devil and Satan, he who deceives the whole habitable world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. He deceives my own people who dwell on the earth because of the signs he was granted to do in front of the beast, saying to those who dwell on the earth that they should make an image of the beast who had the sword wound and lived." Jesus Christ himself gave his discourse of the end times when he stated clear warnings of the signs of the end. "Watch out that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, claiming I am the Christ, and will deceive many. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nations will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of the birth pains. Then you will be handed over to be persecuted and put to death, and you will be hated by all nations because of me. At that time, many will turn away from the faith and will betray and hate each other, and many false prophets will appear and deceive many people. Because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold, for then there will be great distress, unequaled from the beginning of the world until now, and never to be equaled again. If those days had not been cut short, no one would survive. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened. At that time, if anyone says to you, "Look, here is the Christ," or "There he is," do not believe it, for false Christs and false prophets will appear and perform great signs and miracles to deceive even the elect, if that were possible. See, I have told you ahead of time. Jesus Christ died for the sins of all mankind. That means he died for the New Agers, the Freemasons, those in the Illuminati, the world elite, the Luciferians, the Satanists, and even me and you. God himself, taking on humanity, has given mankind a free gift of salvation and of true spiritual freedom. Now we all have a choice. We can live in darkness, allowing evil to enter our lives and unwillingly support the work of Satan and his fallen angels. Or we can let Jesus into our hearts and be spiritually saved forever. There are no prerequisites, rituals, or tests for accepting this gift of salvation. All one needs to do is ask honestly for Jesus to come into their heart. Remember these truths. God loves you, God cares about you, God wants nothing more than to know you personally and save you. Sin separates people from each other and God. Jesus died for your sins and rose again. You can receive Jesus now and know God's love right at this very moment. I pray for you all and hope the truth will indeed set you free. Thanks for your time. I think, in conclusion, I'd like to appeal to those people that have been researching this for any length of time, specifically long periods of time, maybe even years. To you, I don't think this is going to require a lot of convincing. I think that subconsciously you know that a lot of what was said here is true. I think that you have seen over the years a lot of conclusions about what the New World Order is and what their motives are. And I know that you know that it doesn't really explain all the loose ends and tie them all up. I think that you know, after kicking down so many doors in New World Order research and seeing those that truly expose the New World Order, this theme, that it is in fact theistic Satanism behind those doors. I know that you've seen that. You've seen that they are high-level occultists that really run the show and that are in the shadows. And that even those front men at the very tops are only front men, and that the real movers and shakers are those that hold very dedicated beliefs about the worship of Satan. So we even have this idea that somehow doesn't apply. We have a phrase that we'll say, which is, it doesn't matter what you believe, the fact is that they believe it, which sort of means, yeah, sure, they're all occultists at the top, but it doesn't really matter. They're just sort of deluded. And I think that's a very dangerous position, because if you actually are saying there that it doesn't matter, it's not actually true, there isn't really a Satan and there isn't really a power that they're serving, then we should just, again, think that this scenario has something to do with whatever we make it out to be. It certainly can't be about a cosmic war of good and evil, because we've already decided that that can't be true. Yet at the same time, we're pointing out that these people are knowingly worshiping Satan, which is something that the Bible has said has gone on from the very beginning. The kings and queens of all the old systems were always sacrificing their children to various gods and Moloch and these types of things. And they are still doing it today and are gaining power from it. The problem with believing that is it makes too much sense that all of this energy with the New Age preachers and teachers and truth movement icons and gurus are doing mainly two things. One, they're promoting this idea of a New Age coming in which you're going to be God and you're going to be evolved and all the obvious stuff that's preparing you for the system of the Antichrist. And the other part of that is they're telling you that Jesus isn't good, you shouldn't pay attention to him, or at least they're trying to misdirect you, tell him he's just this other guy, he's not really who the Bible says he is, or they're trying to discredit the Bible. There's only two things that these guys are doing. They're telling you and preparing you for the new system that you're going to think is your utopia. And then they're telling you to not pay any attention to the man that the Bible said would crush the one that these people at the top are worshiping. Does anybody see a problem with that? That we have been told what to think about the Bible and Jesus Christ by Satanists. The problem here is that what we've been told and what we've been prepared to believe is all what we would choose to believe. It's all very seductive. They're telling you that you can be as God. They're telling you that there is no real accountability for your actions. that anything that you want to do is good and normal and should be praised. These ideas are very difficult to resist. Truth really is irrelevant at that point because we will fight to defend those ideas regardless of if they are true or not. And that's why there's so many conflicting quote-unquote truths in the New Age and in the truth movement. You know, that's why the first thing that you're taught in the truth movement is that truth is relative. Oh, it doesn't matter, your truth is just as good as my truth, and we'll fight to defend this completely erroneous idea. I've got news for you. It doesn't matter what way the universe operates. The fact is that it does operate one particular way, cause and effect in a closed system. We are dealing with absolute truth. Maybe yours, maybe mine, but it is absolute, and it is one. We should be concerned about looking for the truth. And I suggest to all you researchers out there that you already have enough evidence to know that Jesus Christ is who he says that he is. You owe it to yourself to figure out more about him the way the Bible says that he is. Not the way that the New World Order says that he is, but the way the Bible says that he is. The Bible has been continually discredited. You're told not to listen to it. You're told not to pay attention to it. They do everything under the sun to keep you from it. They always have. So why don't you just realize that and take the time and figure out who is Jesus according to the Bible?